Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read part of C.W. Hobley's book, Bantu, Belief and Magic. And in this part, he talks about the power of the women in the Agikuyu Republic. And I found this part to be very interesting. And he makes an observation that actually I think is very, very accurate. And is the observation that when you went into the Agikuyu Republic, and remember Hobley was a provisional commissioner. He was a British administrator and he came to Kenya in 1890s, and he worked for the British colonial government up to 1920s when he retired. And he points out that when you went into the Kikuyu Republic or Kikuyu society, then you were bound to make a mistake when it came to the position of women in that society, because often the first impression most Europeans will have is that the women did not have any power and the women were below men and the women did not have any say in the matters to do or in the any matters regarding the how society was managed. But he said the more you stayed, the more you started realizing that actually you are wrong and the women had a lot of power in that society. This is what he says. Although far from negligible, the part played by women in the life of a savage tribe is very apt to be overlooked by a man. The reasons are obvious. The African woman is not obtrusive. She is perpetually busy, and one rarely comes into contact with her. Her inner thoughts and beliefs are a sealed book to the investigator, and one is at first inclined to believe that her influence is not worth consideration. The longer the experience, the more clearly one realizes that this lack of information about the woman is one of the weak points of any inquiry. So he's basically saying the first impression you get, and he's speaking as a European looking into this society, you will get the impression that the woman did not have any much say. But then the more you stayed and looked keenly, then you started to realize that, in fact, that's not what it was. He says, among the Kikuyu, there is a council or kiama of old women in every district. They collect goats periodically and present them to the elders of Ukuru or priestly class. They occasionally find troublesome women, and the fine, usually a goat, has to be obtained by the culprit either by extra work or by begging one from her father. The men fear the women's kiama, as it is believed that the members of it have the power to bewitch people. So he says, they also had their own kiyama and they did their own things, and they will punish women who do not follow the rules that is laid down by this kiyama. And he said these women were feared by even men because there was this belief that they had the ability to bewitch people. And in fact, there is a place where Hobley talks about very senior Akikuyu, he calls them chiefs, I think, feared instructing some women to move. And he found that to be very curious, and I'm going to read that part. He says, old women in Kikuyu are much feared, particularly those who are blind, toothless, and decrepit. They are often believed to possess magic power. When meeting them, it is safer to pass by or to speak to them pleasantly. If they are annoyed, they may bring all sorts of ill luck. Being bothered one day by a number of very old women, Chief Mararo and his elders were asked to send them away, but were afraid to tell them to go, and even many of the police dared not talk to them. So at this point, C.W. Hobley is an administrator, and there are these women he thought were becoming a nuisance. Maybe it was in a place where he was holding a meeting, a barasa or something of sorts. And he asks one Chief Mararo, who seems to have been a senior leader in that community. He asks them and the elders to tell the women to move. And he realizes that the chief and these elders feared to talk to these women, and even the police who were around could not dare talk to them or tell them to move because there was this fear of these women. He also talks about how the women turned out to be the obstacle to transforming this society. And he came to find out, the more he interacted with the Akiku, he came to realize that while initially he had thought that it is the men who wielded power and all he needed to do, or all the European needed to do, or the British, to have things done in that society was just to persuade the men and everything was going to be okay. And he gives an example of the Europeans trying to sell to the Agikuyu the jembes. The Agikuyu used to use an old hoe that the Europeans thought maybe this is an opportunity, we should sell them the European jembes that maybe will do a better job. And they quickly learned that that was going to be very difficult. As much as they had seemed like they were convincing or persuading the men, the women were like, no, we are not interested. And they quickly realized that actually the women were going to be a major obstacle in the attempts of the British to transform that society. And this is what he says. This leads to a great difficulty as women are intensely conservative. And when an energetic district officer wishes to improve the economic products of his district and distribute better seed, he is invariably up against the opposition of the women, which is very difficult to overcome. So, and he's talking as an administrator, of course, a colonial administrator, and he's talking about other colonial administrators running into this problem when they try to make new suggestions or try to introduce new things to the community. Then it became very clear that the women were very difficult to change. They were very conservative, as he describes them. He says that the woman knows by long experience that given certain area, a certain seed and certain rainfall, she can feed the family, and one can understand that she should be loath to waste labor on experiments, the results of which is doubtful. So the women understood the agriculture, they understood how things are done, and they knew what they needed to do. So when you come in with new techniques or new tools, they were like, we already have things that we've tried and they work. Why should we bother trying new stuff? This feeling is very deep rooted and consequently most difficult to overcome. The same obstacles are met with in connection with the introduction of big European hoes for agriculture. The African woman has for generations done her planting with either a digging stick or a small African hoe. The tiresome European comes along and worries the men to buy the big hoe, and one can hear the annoyed woman inquiring of her husband why she is being bothered to give up the implement she has been brought up to use with one hand for a strange thing which is more expensive and requires two hands. So the men seems like they were easy to persuade on some of these things, but the women will question and be like, why? What is the point? What we have works and has worked for generations. Why do we have to change to new implements? Yeah, so the European or the British colonial administrators, especially in the Gikuyu society, or those who were sent to serve in the Gikuyu or within the Gikuyu society, they ran into that problem, and they quickly found out that actually, while it seemed, at least initially, that it is the men who wielded all the power and all you needed to do was to persuade the men if you needed something to change, it quickly became apparent to them that actually the women were going to be a huge obstacle, and the men to some extent even feared them, as he gives the example of a whole chief being asked, go tell those women to move, and he's like, he seemed to fear them. He doesn't want to go and tell them to move. And even the police that were around, who I guess were locals, they feared to talk to these women. And it seems like in this society, the women, especially those that were past the childbearing age, started getting a lot of responsibilities, we can say political responsibilities in the society, and they were respected and they were consulted. In fact, there's a part where he says when it came to offering sacrifices at the Mugumo tree, those women played a very critical role in those activities. So that's a very nuanced observation about the position of the women in the Agikuyu Republic. Those are my random thoughts.